Hey students, welcome to the next webinar in the series. This is the resource support session number 2 for our last subject in the Diploma of Management, which sits under term 2, leading a performance culture. There it is, so let's click on that. Now in this session, we'll be taking through the remaining learning activities that fall under the first section of this subject. As mentioned in the first resource session, this is a double. And what we mean by a double is you've got 2 different sets of learning activities for this unit before you jump onto your assessment tasks. By the end of this session today, you'll have all of the information that you need to successfully answer all of those learning activities in this first section, which is what we call Manage People Performance. So just to state that again, by the end of the session, you'll have all of the information you need to answer all of those questions there. These 4 learning activities: allocate work, assess performance, provide feedback, manage follow-up. Welcome into today's session is the lovely Alison. Alison, thank you so much for joining us on this conversation that we will continue on leadership. How are you doing?
My pleasure. I'm really well. Hello, everybody.
Hello, hello. Now, last week we had a fantastic discussion on leadership. I think we really introduced the whole concept of leadership well for students last week. You might remember we were talking a lot about just the changing landscape of leadership, what's happening out there in the world. We talked a little bit about, a global marketplace, and we talked about the internet and how that sort of is changing our leadership landscape. We started talking about the differences between leadership and management, and understanding that there's a real key difference between what we consider to be management and leadership. Um, I presented a few different things on understanding the different levels of leadership. We started talking about things like emotional intelligence, understanding yourself and what that means, the need to effectively understand yourself, be able to regulate your own emotions before being able to assist and help other people. And we started talking a little bit about the role of a coach and effective coaching and mentoring practices as well. And Alison, you had some fantastic examples of some situations which really just highlighted some of those things. So definitely employ students to go back, if you haven't already, have a look at that first webinar, and it'll actually be in the list. You can see there it is, this one right here. So just click on that one to see the resource support session 1. Great overview on leadership theory and concepts. And also what we did was we went through the questions for that first learning activity, which was allocate work. That was in the first session. And we did the first question from the next activity called assess performance. I'm just going to open that learning activity. Here it is, assess performance. This is your second learning activity out of the 4. We did talk through this first question in that session, in the first resource support session as well. So if you want a bit of information on effective mentoring and coaching, what to do when you're handling somebody or trying to help somebody that's experiencing poor performance, have a look at that one. There's some great materials there. And that's where we're going to pick it up today. So we will take you through the remainder of these questions in this activity, and then indeed the next 2 activities: provide feedback and manage follow up. So really a lot of the conversation today, Alison, is in and around managing poor performance and what to do when we're holding what we call structured or formal counselling sessions, or what we call a performance appraisal. So I guess the main theme for today is just talking about the process of a performance appraisal, some do's, some don'ts, what to consider, and those sorts of things. Alison, did you want to add anything to what we were talking about last week before we jump into today's discussion points?
No, I think we covered a lot of really key factors and things last week and really honed in on what leadership means, what skills you need and what it's all about, which was great. And, again, how it sort of flows on from everything else throughout the course up to this point, the importance of, having action plans and your communication skills. Getting to know your staff and being able to liaise with people appropriately and things like that sort of all flow along from everything that we've covered before. So I think this unit is placed really well.
Beautiful, beautiful. So there is a question that, so we talk about formal and informal communications. It's something that pops up through a lot of the subjects, just comes through, that the difference between formal and informal communication. So we're really talking about a formalized communication when we're talking about a performance appraisal. a lot of organisations tend to do these formalised appraisals once a year, once every or twice a year, sometimes even more, depending on the organisation. And it's a much more formalised approach rather than just receiving a bit of feedback on the fly, which is very, very important. We do want to just, I guess, focus on the formalised communication and appraisals in today's session. So I might
It's
just...
so important, Adam, to if you're in that leadership and management role, to do things properly. I actually, an organisation I've worked for in the past had a situation where the CEO of the company actually had a very informal chat with somebody over a drink and then tried to use information in that conversation as part of a formal discussion and said, oh, you promised me you would do this and you promised you would do that in our last review. But it wasn't a review. It was actually a very casual, having a glass of wine in hand conversation that the two of them actually had, and he got into some real serious trouble over that. So, you know, ensuring that you know what the processes and policies and procedures of your organisation are and following those is so important. So there's a place for, you know, informal feedback and discussions, and then there's a very important and appropriate place for your official discussions to happen.
So these first two questions are talking about that formalised approach. The question 3 says describe how you would conduct an appraisal, explain your methods and the outcomes. And question 2 says 3 areas to focus on when holding a structured formal counselling session. When we say a structured formal counselling session, what we're talking about is, as an example, is a performance appraisal. So in question 2, what we're really wanting to dig in and find out are some things that you should just, general things or holistic things, things you should be considering, things that you should be thinking about, things that you should make sure that you do when you're running those formalized sessions. And question 3 is asking a little bit about, you know, the methodology, the approach. What's the order? What's the steps that you might take? So really, when you're answering this question, I'm probably going to sort of mark these questions together in somewhat because there might be a little bit of crossover. Some of the things that you might explain in your methods and the outcomes might be things that you'll consider as important areas. And question 2, so really between these two questions, we're looking for general things that you're going to want to be thinking about, as well as some of the steps that you'll need to be taking. So with that first one, I'll get you to jump in here in a sec, Alison, but I might just show the students a good page that they can go to for this first one. There's a little something in the learning materials called Managing Crucial Conversations. I'm just going to see if I can find that one. I thought I'd had that lined up. There we go. Manage Crucial Conversations. There's some great dot points here on what you can do when you're having those, what we call crucial conversations. Alison, did you, what sort of experience have you had with regards to, I'll let you jump in here.
I've taken part in a lot of performance appraisals from both sides, and actually also been a third party at somebody else's structured formal counselling session as well. And
wow.
That's one thing I find important. If you do actually have the situation where it needs to be formal counselling, so things are going wrong, you've sort of had some informal conversations and things have not changed, so it's now got to the point where you need to do some formal counselling.
Yep.
Again, depends on the organisation's policies and procedures, but most places I have worked at, I have found that one of the things that should be offered at that point is, does the person who is being counselled actually want to have an independent third party in the meeting as well? So they've got the option of whether it's just them and the manager having a one-on-one conversation, or has it got to a point where they're feeling really uncomfortable or have totally lost their confidence, that sort of thing, where they actually feel that they need a third party, which could be, a colleague or another manager or somebody completely independent, just to actually be there to have a third eye on the situation.
Personally, for me, it depends on the relationship I might have with my manager, but I don't think I would want somebody else in that conversation. It's really, you've got to design it where that that person does feel like that it's confidential, it's an open conversation. You can be comfortable enough to express anything that you want to in this situation. What I would like to say leading up though, performance appraisals are um, put into a calendar and scheduled in advance. You'll have performance appraisals with your best performing staff members as well as your worst performing. A lot of the techniques and things that you might consider when you're having what we call those crucial conversations with somebody with poor performance might be similar techniques that you might employ when you're having that formalized performance appraisal. But a performance appraisal is not only just for managing poor performance. Indeed, one of the most important factors of a performance appraisal is just to be able to check in with your staff, see how they're feeling, to give them an opportunity to express themselves, to give both parties an opportunity to review the successes, and sometimes it's also about celebrating the wins and the achievements that you've had in that year. Allowing for a really open conversation, and also it's an opportunity for the business to create what we call a developmental plan or a development plan for that individual, and reinforce some of the values, the standards, some of the KPIs, some of the performance measures that particular person might need. It should be very much an invigorating, inspiring communication. And we talk about leadership from the perspective of leadership is about mobilizing energy out of other individuals. That's what we fundamentally talk about leadership as. So how these conversations relate to leadership is that what we're trying to do is we're trying to motivate our staff members. We're trying to show them that we care. We're listening to them. Their input's very valid. We also want to give them feedback on the good stuff as well as the bad stuff. Sometimes organizations slip into that mode of what we call putting out fires, constantly put out that fire, put out that fire, put out that fire. We tend to also miss the opportunity to what we call celebrate wins. And it's an important opportunity to be able to recognize somebody and give them a pat on the back. And it's a good forum to provide somebody with that information as well, or to give somebody good feedback as well. What we do know about leadership is one of the core elements of leadership is about having a direction. What you talked about last week in the discussions on leadership, Alison, was it requires a followship, or it requires others to follow, which I thought, which is absolutely spot on. It does. It requires a followship. So an important part of I guess when you're creating a development plan with an individual, what you're trying to do there is trying to give them a direction to aim for. You're trying to sort of give them that vision of where they're going. And by creating that vision, that's sort of ground zero in leadership in many ways. By creating that vision, you'll hopefully create that fellowship. And by involving that person, we know involvement's a big deal as well in leadership. By involving that person in that conversation about their development, gets them motivated and inspired to be a part of the process. And that's an absolute integral aspect of having long, focused, sustained energy out of your staff members. So I guess that's kind of drawing that nice connection between why we're having this conversation as part of a leadership discussion. Yeah, Alison.
Yeah, there's different things. That question too. Describe 3 important areas to focus on with that first one, which is the structured formal counselling session.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there's so many different things that you need to take into consideration there.
Let's go through some. I think it's a good idea.
Yeah. I mean, things, as simple as having the right location and the right people involved. If it's got to be, the people who are directly involved. And again, if you can have the right people that will have the most open styled conversation, as you said before, you don't think you would ever feel comfortable having a third party in the room for something like that. And I very much would feel the same. But I know some people, if they don't feel that their direct manager or the person that is supposed to be their leader, they can completely be honest and open with. There are sometimes not perfect relationships in the workplace, so it can exist. So yeah, right location, the right people involved, making sure that it is a two-way conversation as well. It's a counselling session, so it's got to be, everybody's got to have the right to have their say, and hopefully a plan of action is going to be the end result out of this. So you're actually going to be able to talk about, where do we go from here?
Yep. That's a great point about location. I actually never really thought about it. You talked before about having that
Mm,
informal chat at the pub. If I was having a formalized conversation, I would not be taking them to the pub to do that.
that's
Um,
exactly right. Yeah,
so it's very, and I might choose a private location where I can close the door and that person feels secure and comfortable enough to have that conversation without others listening over the top. Now,
that's right.
for these questions, again, it's happy for the guys to answer this from the perspective of running a performance appraisal and/or providing what we call corrective feedback to somebody, um, which is a little bit more about what we're talking about here. So two-way
Mm,
communication is perfect for both of those, whether I'm providing corrective feedback, i.e., hey, I just want to let you know about something that you've been doing or done or could be doing a bit better. I probably wouldn't approach it that way as well. Uh,
mm.
but two-way communication is important definitely for both. I was going to
So
say,
yeah, when you
yeah,
go into that next one, describe how you conduct a performance appraisal. Be interesting actually to see if some of the students have had experience with this and can actually give first-hand answers on these sorts of things, if you've actually been a part of performance appraisals in the past, or otherwise, have a look through the resources that we've got here. Have a look online, see what sorts of things are there. It's really interesting. Some organisations will have like ratings forms that you need to complete beforehand. So, for example, you might say, okay, right, throughout the month of December, we'll be doing our performance appraisals with everybody in the team. So
mm,
select your date and time for when they'll take place, so you have advance notice of it, so you can prepare. As the employee, you can actually prepare for it as well, know what
mm,
you want to say, what you want to get off your chest, what you want to ask for, those sorts of things. Sometimes you might be given one of those forms where you have to actually rate your own performance. Um,
I've done that before, absolutely.
yeah, yeah. Some people love them, some people hate them, find it really hard to be brutally honest in those sorts of things. So again, there's certain workplaces that can work really well, certain workplaces that are probably not the best way to go about it.
Quite often the
But
organisation will also rate you on those things that they're asking you to rate on, and then what they'll do is compare and say, look, where did you rate yourself here as per, the item might be, is willing to be innovative and create new ideas or whatever it might be. Now you'll rate
that's right,
yourself
and
on
that's
that.
the whole point of it then, so that two-way conversation starts happening. So you have actually said, I feel I do this really, really well, and I'm not quite so confident in doing this task and that sort of thing, and then you have the open conversation with the manager or the person conducting the review, who might turn around and say, you've rated yourself really low in this area. I actually can see so much potential.
Yeah,
How about we look at doing some training just in this area, and that's going to boost your confidence. So that's the
absolutely,
whole point of it. Again, it starts that two-way conversation on the important issues.
absolutely, absolutely. I think the most important thing, you say two-way communication, it's spot on. It's the most important thing when you're having any of these sorts of things is not to come in with an agenda, is to be able to collaborate with that person. If I'm coaching you on something, Alison, you don't. There's only one person who knows Alison as well as Alison knows Alison, and that's Alison. I think I might have just confused everybody there, but basically nobody knows you as well as you do, is what I'm trying to say. And for me to come in and what we call send solutions to you, it's a communication thing. If I'm coming, oh yes, I know all of your problems. It's very judgmental. It sort of says, look, I'm a bit better than you. I understand all of your flaws and problems better than you, and not only that, here's your solution. It might miss the mark completely. And as you've mentioned, with regards to doing a rating yourself or having somebody else rate your own performance by collaborating together and seeing where the gaps are there. That's what we call two-way. That's collaborating. That's not coming in with solutions and I've got all the answers to all of your problems. You might miss out on a whole lot of information if you take that approach in any case, and you might also get people offside with the way that you're going about it too, because people can hear that sort of judgmental type of communication, and it's not overly nice at the end of the day. Um, One of the most important things that you talk about location. It's really, location is a big one. Uh, the way that you position your body language, the way that you sit in a given room. Imagine so we've picked a great location. We've picked a meeting room. Perfect. We can close the door. We can have some privacy. Can you imagine a table that's like 10 meters long? And I've asked you to sit on one end of that table, and I'm sitting 10 meters on the opposite side of the table. That's all wrong. That's all wrong. I'm effectively, by putting that huge table in between us, what am I actually doing? I've actually put a barrier up between us. And it's a physical barrier, but I've put it up in between us. You can imagine a table being a square or even a rectangular formation. One of the best things to do when you're holding a performance appraisal is actually to position yourself on what do you call it, on their adjacent side. So if somebody's sitting on the left-hand side, sit on the bottom side of the table, not on the opposite side. Does that make sense?
Mm.
So don't sit opposite that
Yeah,
person.
so almost side by side rather than looking them direct in the eye and making it feel like a very judgmental situation.
Absolutely. Having those physical barriers in between actually can create barriers in that communication as well. So you want to just remove those. You want it to create it so it's a very relaxed atmosphere. So one way to create a relaxed atmosphere is, as you said, choose the location, but also just clear the decks of your appointments. Make sure that people know that you're in a meeting for an hour and can't be disturbed. Here's a big one. Turn off your mobile phone. If you're having one of these performance appraisals with me, or just one of those crucial conversations with me, and your phone starts ringing, I'm feeling all of a sudden that, you know what, you've got more important things to do
Mm.
than worrying about me. Um, So it's one of the most important things you can do, is just to create that atmosphere, I guess, of that, that other person's really important, that you hear, that you're really interested in what they have to say. Um, yeah.
Another thing I think is really important too is make sure that you are documenting the things that are being discussed, and as I said before, you're coming up with a plan of action, and that both parties then are happy and comfortable with what you've come up with and are happy to sign off on it as well. It is an official part of the process for your organisation, and so you do need to document these sorts of things. And yeah, having a plan of attack, that's what it's all about. So, do we just continue to go along the way we have been? Have we found some areas that you want to expand your job role, or some tasks that you need to have taken off you because they're creating too much stress? Is there some training that you've requested?
Mm.
So, and put some time frames on it as well. If you've said, the conversation has been, look, I don't feel like I'm terribly confident with my customer service. Let's find some training for you, and I will do that within the next 3 months. Let's put a time frame on it, rather than just putting it out there that, yep, somebody will look into that for you, and it never gets done because you haven't set a time frame for it. So things like that become really important, and again, it's going to make the person who's being appraised here actually feel like they have been heard and come out of it with some positives to look forward to in the future. And that's what it's all about.
I remember when I had a performance appraisal many, many moons ago, when that was just before I got into doing vocational training, and I realized it was an area that I wanted to get into. And they asked me, they said, what would you like to do in the business in the next year or 2 years or 5 years, or, what sort of things do you want to do? And I let them know straight out. I said, look, this is exactly what I'd like to be doing. I'd love to be working in training. Um, I feel like I've got a lot to offer in that space. It's something that I'd really love to do. And as a result, they were able to help create a development plan for me, which included opportunities for me to get practice at training. I would sit in when there'd be a new induction group. They would get me to present one item for the new inductees. They gave me opportunity to do that. And what that sort of shows, last week we were talking about the 3 levels of leadership, and really the ultimate third level is about, motivating somebody on their core values. So we talked about level 1 being,
Yes.
leading based on visible behavior. So things like coercions or threats, or even rewards and incentives, are that first level. That second level being changing the way that somebody thinks, consciously thinks. So we're talking about using logic, data, rationale. Level 3, being able to motivate somebody, sustain their energy for a long period of time, and the way to do that is to connect with them on their core values. So knowing that one of my core values was professional development and wanting to get into the training space, they were talking my language by giving me little carrots along the way and having a development plan which connected with my value set, which connected with what I was trying to do on a long-term basis. And I was actually I managed to stay at that organization, you know, a lot longer, and eventually there was no opportunity for me to do any more than what I did, and we both recognized that, and that was okay too. But they gave me ample opportunity to develop my skills, which set me on the journey to become a trainer, which is what I do now. And through that one performance appraisal, it gave me those opportunities, and that's sort of what we're talking about here. There's also another great page on all of this on performance appraisal in your learning materials, guys. Have a look for, where is it? No, that's page 1. Performance appraisals and career planning. It talks about, that positive approach that we were talking about, some of those things that we need to do, how to conduct it. Here are some of those elements that we were talking about in question 2, some things that you need to do. And there might be another page here, then talking about developing performance plans as well, which is really the outcome that you'll want to achieve through your performance appraisal. That by the end of the performance appraisal, you'll want to have a development plan in place. That is something that you'll monitor, that you'll check in with regularly, that will be there to guide that professional development for that particular individual, but also there to guide their performance as well for the coming period as well.
So this is a really good example actually too of, remember back in the very, very beginning, we talked about those SMART goals. Actually, I think we did that when you were away, Adam, Melissa and I. We had a few webinars where we discussed SMART goals. And yeah, so this again is a perfect example. So when you're actually going through this process and trying to put some plans in place, make sure you follow that SMART formula. Be specific with what it is that you are agreeing to. Is it something that you can actually measure? Make sure it's achievable and realistic.
Yep.
And as I said before, set up a time frame for it. Quite simple, but just those 5 little steps again, put them into play and you can't go wrong.
For example, if I was wanting to sell more motor vehicles, if I work at a car yard, if I was just to say I want to sell more, is that enough? Is that enough of a goal just to say, is that specific enough when we're talking about using the SMART formula? It's probably not specific enough. You need to be able to measure it. So to measure it, you almost always need to be able to put a number against it. There are things that you can't, but almost always there's a number that's associated with a measurement. So consider what the number might be is when you're putting these goals together and these individual performance plans together. Have you had you had any other experiences with regards to performance appraisals, things that you would think about, things that we might suggest to students in regards to this space? One of the main ones.
Another thing I think with performance plans, performance appraisals, that sort of thing as well, having that job description and the KPIs. Hopefully you've had a really good system from the get-go, so your recruitment process, which I know we will start discussing I think next week, but that recruitment process needs to actually start in the right way. So when people come into your organisation, they're fully aware of what's expected of them. They're fully aware of, once they're inducted, what the performance appraisal system will be, how often it will happen, all those sorts of things. And they've got a job description which tells them exactly what is required of them. And if you've actually got, specific KPIs, they should be discussed in a performance appraisal. How are you going? You're exceeding sales in this particular area, which was one of your KPIs. Big tick, well done, fantastic. However, sales in this particular area, quite low, so let's talk about that. So it opens up a lot of different opportunities for you. So, you know, standard documents within the organisation, like job descriptions and KPIs, things like that, should very much be a part of your performance appraisal process.
Absolutely. Absolutely. There's some information there on getting training participants in the performance management and review process. There's a really nice description here on what a performance plan is too, which I might read out as well. So again, this is the end goal of our performance appraisals. A performance plan can be utilized to assist you in the employee's performance appraisal. It is a comprehensive written report that sets out all of the outcomes and performance requirements on which that individual is to be assessed. Essentially, the performance plan is an agreement between managers, teams, individuals determining what needs to be achieved within the required, and I'm also going to say here, agreed. Well, it's an agreement, therefore it is a collaboration within that required time frame. Yeah, that's just not a bad way of saying it too. So, and you were talking about documenting. Everything gets documented as well, and that's one of the things that happens in this formalized process. It is documented, it is written down, it is taken seriously to the point where, you know, it's revisited again. It's not just that we have these little meetings, you know, we write a few things down and put something into a filing cabinet. There's actually a question that the guys will have to answer, I think. Let me just see if I can find it. Not in this set. Not in this set. Yes, question 2 in manage follow-up, which is the third set, it actually says what processes do you use to ensure that the development plan is a living, breathing document that employers use to help improve performance. So we've had our performance appraisal, we've got an agreed performance plan together, we've both actually signed it. We're both really happy with where we're going. I'm feeling motivated as an employee that I can see that the things that are important to me and the things that I want to achieve in my career are being, you know, looked at and considered. The worst thing that could happen at this point is that that document gets shoved into a filing cabinet and nobody ever discusses it again. So what can we do in that regard there, Alison, to make sure that what we create, that document that we create, is what we call a living and breathing document?
And I think that's why we sort of say, you know, put timeframes and things on there. So if you're only doing your performance appraisals once a year or once every 6 months, you're hopefully going to be setting out a few different things that both parties want to happen and have agreed to throughout that 6 or 12 months. So if you've got the stepping stones set out there, you've got the document and you can look at it and you might say, okay, yes, we agreed to you getting some customer service training and I agreed to set that up for you within a 3-month time frame. That deadline comes up of 3 months, so it gets raised again and discussed again at that point. Yes, I have found this training for you. You'll be undertaking that in the next 6 weeks. And then after that 6 weeks, you can actually talk about how did it go? How are you now feeling? So it's something that, you know, is continually worked on, is the whole point of it. So, you know, if you're only doing your appraisals once every year, you might have several different small goals throughout the year that you actually set up in this document. So you need to keep revisiting them then when those deadlines come up.
Look, I believe in a high-performance environment, they need to be more than once a year. Once a year is too long. Far too long. There's a lot of stuff happens in a year. I mean, if you think back, where was I this time last year? We all change. I mean, the environment changes, industry changes, things change, expectations change, people around us change. You know, the same staff members aren't here that were here a year ago. So, especially in those high-performing environments, it's got to be, you know, dealt with probably on a quarterly basis. At least a formalized feedback session on performance, regardless of whether we're doing, you know, full development plans every 3 months. Probably don't need to do that every 3 months. You might check in on it in those sessions. How are we going with our development? How are you feeling about that? Is there anything you want to do or change? No problems. But you know, it's what I might just throw the question out at you, Alison. Unrehearsed question, but how would it feel if you worked for a company and never received any formalized feedback, never knew what they thought about you, never ever got good or bad feedback on what you're doing? How would that feel?
It's an awful situation. I actually have a class at the moment, and one of my poor students, she works in a retail place. She's been there now for 3 years and keeps getting all these different tasks added to the list of things she has to achieve, even if she
Yep.
hasn't been trained in that particular area.
Yep.
And she's forever saying to me, I don't really know if I'm doing it well. I don't know why I'm being selected to do these things. And I said, why don't you bring it up at your performance appraisal? She said, I've never had one. So after 3 years, she has never actually had a performance appraisal. There's like 15 staff in the company, so it's not huge. I mean, I know that that's quite a few staff for the manager perhaps to, meet with, but even once every 6 months would be better than nothing at all. She definitely feels like she doesn't have the opportunity to really break down what's expected of her and actually see where things are going. Every day is a bit of a surprise, I think, to her. I felt very sorry for her when she told me that the other day.
Think about a football team. How does a football team know when they've done well on any given day? What's their biggest indicator of performance?
Obviously, usually the score on the scoreboard, but the
Absolutely.
feedback from the coach.
Well,
And the feedback from the coach, though.
there is that too, but there is a very, very simple one, and that is the scoreboard. Now, imagine you took the scoreboard away from a football team. Now, the football team are playing, they're getting all of this feedback from their coach during the week, they're training their guts out, and there's no scoreboard. How would that make the guys on the team feel? They'd be confused. And what we talk
There
about
you
when
go.
we
You
talk about,
think,
yeah, one thing we talk about in smart goals, I'm glad you mentioned it before, is it's got to be measurable. If it's not measurable, then you can't answer this question. How will I know if I've achieved my goal? Or how will I know if I've performed or achieved? If you can't answer that question, you're in trouble. Which is why we talk about having KPIs as well, because a KPI simply is a method for me to be able to go, how do I know if I've done a good job today? If I want to go home feeling good about the work that I've done today, how will I know when I've achieved what I need to achieve on a daily, weekly, monthly, yearly basis if I'm not getting any feedback? Now, some things are easier than others. I mean, Alison, if I work in sales, I can run a sales report and see how many cars I sold. If I'm a car yard, I can see how many cars the other sales guy sold, and I could probably do some sort of analysis and go, well, it looks like I'm selling more cars than him. Not everything, not every industry is as black and white as far as what the KPIs might be. A lot of them might be in and around service, and we know from things like service, it's really hard to quantify great levels of satisfaction, which is what we're trying to achieve with some of our customer service um, policies and procedures and what have you. If I never receive any feedback from you, how will I know if I've done a good job? Now you think about the football team that doesn't have the scorecard, how confused they'd be and how unmotivated would they be to turn up every single week if they never get that little kick, that little buzz, that release of dopamine, that feeling of, we achieved something today. It's great. They never get that sensation there, and this is why it comes back to leadership, because it's all about having sustained energy that's that you're providing to your staff members. Yeah, what do you think about all that, Alison?
well, yeah, I was going to say, you think about those soccer teams who play nil-all draws all the time. They don't actually have anything terribly positive up on the scoreboard, do they?
Well,
They are really going to need feedback from the coach.
that's true. That's true. That's true. But at least they have a scoreboard. I mean, at least they're keeping score. I mentioned they played a whole game, and I mean with soccer it's easy because you can remember football how many goals people have kicked. But then there are other games where you really do need a scorecard because it's really impossible to keep your head up, to keep aware of actually what the scoreboard is.
That's
Um,
right.
and we need as staff members, we need to feel like we're achieving something. If I can't get that sensation that I feel like I've achieved something, my motivation levels are going to start to drop. So we need to
Yeah.
be able to create a situation for our staff members where they can feel good. They can go home on a daily basis, weekly, monthly basis going, you know what, I feel great because I feel like I achieved something. Um, we also know from human motivation that human beings that feel incredibly motivated often feel like they're contributing to something that's bigger that's more meaningful than just one thing. So if I can understand what my KPIs and what my daily input has for the whole business as a whole, and this is why we also talk about linking strategic goals with individual goals. But if that's all linked and I feel like my involvement is contributing to the overall picture, that's going to help with my motivation levels as well. So it's terribly important to keep score, terribly important to set KPIs. Just think about the football team that doesn't have a scoreboard, how confused they might be. So that's I guess where we're at with performance appraisals. Alison, should I have a look and see what else we've got here in the set?
Yes.
Are we happy with some of the things that we've given students there in
I
relation?
think we've covered a heck of a lot. If they can't come up with 3 important areas to focus on and then sort of some steps in conducting a performance appraisal, we may have not have done so well, but I think we've covered absolutely everything.
Yeah, and look, the learning materials are really good with answering it directly. I think it's just good that we have that discussion so that it sort of shows how it all connects to the idea of leadership, the importance of having these sessions. You had some nice examples too, so that was great. Let's have a look at question 4. It's how do processes within an organisation impact on the performance culture? So what we're trying to do is create a culture of performance here. The question is asking, how do processes, the way we go about things, our policies, the way that we do things in the organisation, how do those things affect our end goal, which is our performance culture? Did you want to jump on?
Again, it'll be interesting. Yeah, it'd be interesting to see if people have actually got some experiences themselves where they've come from with this. But even for those who haven't, I'm sort of thinking about processes like performance appraisals, quite simply. If you know that every 3 months you get the chance to sit down and talk to your direct supervisor or the manager of your department, something like that, and have a very open, honest conversation and discuss, what you want your future to hold. What do you want to change? What are you really happy with? If the organisation is quite open with having that sort of process there, so it's part of the performance culture within that organisation, that's certainly going to make you feel good. I'm also thinking things like, the induction process. So we're talking about processes here. If they're inducted really well and everything is covered, and they're introduced to everybody and it's really clear what their job description is, what their KPIs are, who they can go to for little questions, who they can go to for big problems, all those sorts of things, that if they go through that process and it's really in depth, that certainly shows that the performance culture of your organisation is one where they actually care about their staff.
Absolutely. There's another question I want to highlight here in conjunction with this one for students. So this is question 4 from Assess Performance, but also question 3 in Manage Follow-Up talks about performance culture too. So we might link these 2 questions together. Question 3 in Manage Follow-Up says, a performance culture is unique to each organisation. List 3 elements, and I think this question makes sense to come in earlier because we're talking about what performance culture actually is here. List 3 elements of your company that might impact your performance. Consider any gaps as well. So with regards to these questions, there was a really good page on performance culture in your learning materials. We're looking at it now. And in this section, the following components are actually discussed in relation to creating a high performance culture. So strategy, adaptability, leadership, communication, structure, people, processes, technology, diversity, evaluation. What you were talking about in that previous question was simply just on the processes. But you're going to see there's a whole lot of information here on each of these subsections and how they relate to performance culture. So a really good page for students to go to for a bit more information there on performance culture.
Fabulous.
Are we happy for students to sort of jump in there and have a little bit of a look on, and a bit of a feel around in the learning materials when answering these ones?
I think so. I think, if they go through that, if they haven't got, direct experiences that, jump straight to the front of their mind and that they want to draw from, definitely have a look through those pages and some of that information, and I think it'll really stimulate some very positive answers.
Absolutely. I mean, in the short, anything that is likely to change the way that I feel about my environment, about my place of work, about how motivated I am to work and be there, anything that could impact that is what we're referring to here. So anything, any process, anything at all, any way that the business operates that might have some sort of negative or positive impact on the way that I feel about the place, the way that has my motivation for working and being there is what we're asking for in this question. The next question here, Alison, question 5, explain how the lack of a clear risk management plan linked to the strategy of the organisation impacts your ability to create and develop a performance culture. So we talked a lot about risk management in project planning. We talked about the need to have a risk management plan when you're running projects to obviously maximise the success of those given projects. What we're talking about here is the strategic direction of the business. So the question is, how is a lack of a risk management plan in relation to our strategy, how does that impact on our performance culture, on our ability to perform?
I think it just comes back to ensuring everybody feels confident that in general terms there are plans in place. You know, the what ifs have already been considered. You know, if you worked for an organisation that was going into a brand new big project and you took a step back and thought, oh goodness, what if this happens, what if that happens, and you know, sort of there's obvious things there that staff are going to think are risks, and you can't see that anybody in a position of, you know, management or leadership has actually thought about those and potentially put a contingency plan in place. It's going to raise a few probably questions in your mind and sort of attack your confidence a little bit, I would think.
What are some of the things that could happen if we don't have a risk management plan in place? Just general things that could happen.
Oh, well, if they're sort of looking at, you know, sales not being maintained, you know, maybe you're in an environment where, you know, technology is becoming more of an issue. I remember years and years ago when I worked in the travel industry, when technology started to come over, a lot of the customers were able to do their own research, actually book things themselves. Working in a retail travel agency, we knew that there were some risks out there that we didn't have a great deal of control over. The fantastic thing within our organisation was that both my direct manager and owner of the business that I worked at and our head office were always addressing that pretty much every month to all the staff, what we are doing to ensure that this doesn't send us under, that we are going to maintain our business levels and our integrity and keep all of our staff, because we are putting plans in place to make sure that this big risk doesn't have an effect on us and doesn't have an effect on all the staff. That was absolutely fantastic because, yeah, and I know some other places in town that were similar businesses to us, but just small privately owned boutique agencies, if you like, weren't really sure what to do about it and didn't really take too many steps, didn't put too many plans in place, and yeah, actually ended up putting staff off and becoming even smaller than they were because they didn't have a risk management plan in place.
It's amazing. It's amazing. Well, I've seen it before where businesses try and do something brand new. So their strategic direction might be, you know what, we want to move into this particular market area. We want to sell more of this product. We want to try something different. And in the process of trying something different, they haven't considered the risk of the business. We talk about operational risk and commercial risks in project planning. By putting all of their resources into the new basket, they actually are at a risk of disenfranchising their current customer base by not servicing them well as they could. And so there are things that you need to consider when you are doing different things, strategic things. In essence, everything that you do impacts on the word culture, which therefore impacts on performance culture and your ability to perform. Everything that you do. So if you're not considering everything that you do, what the pros and cons of your actions are, you're putting yourself effectively at risk with relation to your culture and your performance culture.
Again, it's all about, if you've got, you know, risk management plans in place, making sure that the staff are just aware of that, you know, so that they actually feel part of the organisation. That's what the performance culture is all about. Sort of culture meaning, if you're part of this organisation, you are part of our culture. You have, you can see what we believe in, what we're striving for,
Our
what's going to
value.
make everybody comfortable.
Absolutely.
Mm.
Last question in this set is two different ways you can document performance in your two different ways you can document performance in your organization. The one that we've really talked about mostly being the performance appraisal is the obvious one that comes to mind there. There's a great page here on documenting performance and providing feedback. Here's a sample little plan for students on that page, which really just talks about areas where excellence and performance have been demonstrated. So again, it's important always to focus when you document performance on things that people do well and the areas that might need improvement, anything else, additional items, training, professional development that's required, and what's the next step. So I mean, that's very, very basic, but that's just really outlining a methodology of doing it. Doesn't have to be overly complex when you're documenting something, as long as it is written down and agreed. Quite often it's good to have a performance plan documented that's signed by both parties and have copies for both parties as well, so that me as an individual can read that if I want to. That we're both using that document, we're using that to guide my performance. So yeah, that's, I guess, two different ways to document performance. Okay, so maybe a document that talks about, so this is a performance appraisal, for example, documenting performance. But you also might have things like, your sales targets or your goals written down, things like that, documented in that fashion. Or you might also have a review form for your probation period, which might be another way as well. We'll talk a little bit about that probation period in the next session. We'll talk about the induction and how that relates to these conversations as well. So yeah, there's a couple of good things to note on this one too, just in relation to um, conducting formal feedback sessions. Here are some great tips, and these are some things that you can actually include in your answers to the first couple of questions that we went through today. These are some really important areas just to think about when running these sort of sessions. So that last one, don't put any surprises in one of those sort of sessions. Timely, be specific. Some of those areas that we talk about in goal setting are the same sort of tips there for running those sessions too. Anything you would like to add to that last question, Alison, which was just on ways to document performance?
I think we've pretty much covered it. Again, that, as I said, making sure that there's job descriptions, KPIs, all those sorts of things, and then you put them into that formal situation like an appraisal. There's lots of different ways, that you can have documents along the way.
So students can actually refer to their own organisation if they want to answer this question, or they can just answer it, generally speaking, ways that you can document performance or ways that your organisation does, either way.
Great.
Here's the next set. Question 1 in provide feedback, the next learning activity says, what training or coaching methods could you use during weekly performance meetings? How can coaching help to achieve excellence in performance? Now, if you remember, question 1, we talked about explaining how you can use effective mentoring and coaching, where we provided some sort of holistic things to consider, things to think about. There's a page in the learning materials called Your Role as the Coach, which is right here. There's some great elements here, 7 key elements of coaching. Now, these elements are great things that you might even include in that first answer that we talked about last week, some of those effective mentoring and coaching techniques. But for the purpose of this one talks about the actual word method is used in this question. It says, what training or coaching method could you use? A method is a methodology. So there is an actual example of a method in the materials under coaching styles. If you click here under this thing called coaching styles, it's a method called GROW, GROW. For this question, I actually want students, not sure if it probably should have been a little bit more explicit, or it should have been stated a little bit better than the question, but I want students to actually just define the GROW method of providing, it's a simple 4-step process which helps you to structure a coaching and mentoring session. So each letter, GROW, stands for something different, and that's just your methodology of going about it. So the first letter is G, which stands for goal, and the goal is the end point. That's where we want to end up with our feedback sessions or our coaching sessions. R stands actually for reality, which talks about, okay, where we are now, what are the issues, what are the challenges, how far away are we from our end goal. O actually could be obstacles or options. In this example, it actually refers to O as being options, which is similar. Well, options basically are ways that we can deal with the gap between our reality and what our goal is. Obstacles obviously are what might be preventing us from achieving. And then W is the wrap up or the way forward. That's what the last part of that acronym stands for. The options effectively at this point are converted into action steps, which will be what we call the way forward. So it's really just a stepped out approach for how you might run a coaching or mentoring session. I want students to actually refer to that method called GROW when answering this particular question. Even though no doubt you can come up with a whole range of fantastic answers for this one, I actually want you guys to use that particular one. So question 1, what training or coaching methods could you use? Explain, do a nice description on the stages of GROW. Which, if you go back into your learning materials, which we had before there, if you click on this, it'll actually open up a audio video. It'll actually explain what you need to do there. Next question, Alison, can you see that? Do you want to read that question out? Question 2.
Yeah, explain how informal feedback contributes to better performance in an organisation. So we've talked before, haven't we, about informal discussions, informal feedback that happen in the workplace, as opposed to these formal sessions, which are like your performance appraisals or counselling sessions. So, have a think about if you've had informal feedback in the past, and how did that actually help better your performance within the organisation? Or how do you think, if you were to have a conversation with somebody else, so put yourself in that leadership role, how would you conduct informal feedback, and why would you do it? So why have those sorts of conversations? How is it going to contribute to the organisation actually being a little bit better? So are we talking about just one-on-one conversations over coffee? Are we talking about just a casual team meeting where an open discussion takes place that actually can turn into quite a big feedback session when you've got several people's points of view coming out? And, how does that actually improve the performance in the organisation? So think about how everybody feels about that, how you feel about that, and what you think it's going to benefit.
Absolutely. So the informal methods, as you've pointed out, are things like coffee, popping by somebody's desk and saying, hey, great job, or otherwise. That's an informal method, as opposed to having either a departmental meeting or a one-on-one meeting or formalised meeting that might have an agenda to it, or the performance appraisal being our classic formalised method of providing feedback. Could you imagine, Alison, how would you feel, actually, it's always a good question, how would you feel if the only feedback you received was formal? So how would you feel if the only time you ever received feedback on your performance, and as important as it is, how would you feel if it was only in the form of a performance appraisal once every 6 months or once every year?
Probably quite stressed, actually. If you had no indication of how you were going and how management felt you were going.
True.
Yeah, to me, I think that would make me feel quite uneasy and quite stressful about the whole situation. I would actually be very anxious then going into an official situation if I had no indication about how people were feeling about me.
Yep, absolute. The big thing for me when we're talking about formal versus informal, the main factor for me is what I call the immediacy. When you're training, have you got a dog at home, Alison?
I have a cat.
Yeah. cats do what they want to do. So this ain't going to work for cats.
Yeah.
When you're training a dog, what they talk about is that you absolutely have to act with immediacy. Have to provide that feedback to the dog right now. And I'm not comparing human beings to dogs, but could you imagine if your dog does a poo-poo inside and 3 weeks later, you go up to the dog and say, you're a bad boy. The dog's going to look at you like, what are you talking about? The point being here is like the feedback, the immediacy of the feedback is super duper important. If you come to me in 6 months' time and say, hey, Adam, you remember that time 6 months ago? And I'm like, no, I don't remember that time 6 months ago. And now I'm feeling like you've held on to something for 6 months and didn't tell me. Now I'm feeling like it's a personal attack. I've now thinking, what other things have you not told me about? Can create a few issues. So the immediacy of that feedback is absolutely important. And you know what? Sometimes those little pop over, that's just enough to motivate that person. That could be enough, quality leadership for that person to motivate them for the rest of the week. Could be enough for the month.
And again, you're wanting to have we keep talking here about culture. You want to have a positive culture. Open communication is very much part of that. Being able to,
Absolutely.
along the way and not just having things build up to, it's all got to be done officially. If you can't work with your staff and, have little conversations and be open and honest, what's your culture like? Probably a bit of a mess.
Authenticity, we talk about it as being a key leadership trait in any case. So if I feel that somebody's withholding information from me, I'm starting to question some things, So if I feel like that person is open enough to tell me if there's something that needs to be told, I'm never ever wondering what you're thinking because I know how you feel and think about me because you already told me. And I'm feeling good about that. It's confusion. I'm not having anxiety at night when I come from work thinking of wondering how people might consider or feel about me in the workplace. So yeah, fantastic. Good discussion. Question 3. Sorry, I'm just having a bit of a...
You use to gain efficiency and cost effectiveness of employees. How do you set expectations and measure those results? A little bit more in depth than that one. So we're thinking here about efficiency and cost effectiveness of your staff. So what sort of things do you think about that one?
Look, I think it's really important that you understand your employees. We're all human beings. We've all got strengths. We've all got weaknesses. There are some things that I absolutely despise doing, some things that I absolutely love to do. So if you can connect with me on those deep levels, then you can maximize my efficiency and all of those things. So, even as simple as like putting the right people, allocating the right person for the right job, matching the skills for the job that you're doing is an important one. Another thing you might consider are the resources. Have I given this person enough resources to do a job? You might say, hey, look, there's 5 crates of milk at the back. I want you to go on and stock a milk fridge if you can. No problems. And I go out there and I realize there's no trolleys, there's no way of me getting this milk, and all of a sudden I am literally lifting individual bottles of milk from the warehouse out to the front of the shop. That's not the most effective way of doing things. So you really also got to consider your resources too. What are the resources I'm providing this person? What are the tools this person may need to do the job? We talk about poor performance. Look, 80% of poor performance is usually traced back to the organization. You could talk about things like training mechanisms. We talked about measurement and things like that. So to gain efficiency out of somebody, we've got to give them a set of goalposts. If they don't know where they're aiming for, if we don't give them KPIs to aim for, how will they know if they've achieved? And what will actually push them to do that extra 10% when they're really close to hitting that goal? They're 10% off. They're going to push to get that last little bit. Communication is super, 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 super duper important in everything. I'll always harp on about communication. When you're communicating to somebody, when you're allocating work to somebody, it is important that you communicate to their level of understanding. So Alison, if I'm asking you to do a job, I'm going to make sure that you understand what I'm saying. So if I'm throwing in some technical things in the conversation that I'm talking about, I'm doing I'm actually assuming that you have all of this background knowledge that you may have or you may not have. I shouldn't ever assume anything when I'm allocating work to you. And it's the same when we talk about this in a project management situation. It's important that I use a number of methods, a number of ways to communicate, but I communicate to your level of understanding, not to mine. It's not about me ticking and flicking and making sure, oh, yep, I had that conversation and it's done with. I'm checking with you to make sure that you understand exactly what your expectations are or what my expectations are, and how it's going to be measured, and effectively give you an understanding on what's expected, how long the job might take, what resources are available, how to troubleshoot if you have any problems. So for me, communication skill is a super, super duper an important one. But this is really talking about methods. Have you got anything else that you'd like to add to this one, Alison, as far as methods go?
No, I mean, you already mentioned like the KPIs, that sort of thing. That then goes across to cost effectiveness as well, doesn't it? Because as you said, if you've got someone who's running around doing a million things in one day, but haven't actually achieved anything under their KPIs, so they've actually been doing things that they really didn't need to do, you're not gaining efficiency, but how cost effective is it to actually pay somebody for a job that they shouldn't be doing?
True.
So sometimes those two things, I think, come hand in hand.
Yeah, look,
Efficiency
you've
and
got
cost effective.
you've got to provide ample resources for somebody to do a job, and whether that's technical support that they might need on that job, whether it's additional
Mm,
resources, whatever it is, you've got to make sure that they've got what they need. Um, it's not well and good for a leader to say, well, you know what, I'm busy, so I'll get back to you, because effectively that person is saying, you know what, I'm actually more important than you right now, and I don't really care if it takes you an extra hour or two to do that job. It's of no interest to me whatsoever. So, that communication is super, super duper important. Being able to provide those human and physical resources to do a given job is incredibly important in all of this as well.
yeah.
Should we jump on to the next one?
Yes.
Can you hear me okay? I've got a real slow computer. Is my audio coming through okay for you?
Breaking up a little bit every now and then, but 99% of it I'm getting.
I will take 99% every day of the week. Sounds good. We've pretty much covered just about everything because we've covered these last two questions. The only thing we haven't sort of looked at is just a common information source regarding staff development processes. So the things that are in place in an organisation that are documented or otherwise that have information about staff development. Where would I go? Who would I speak to? Where might I go to seek that out?
Again, I guess it's going to depend on some people out there, some of the students out there might actually have very personal experiences on that and might actually have, work for a big organisation that actually has human resource departments and things like that. So it might be some very good internal people or systems that you have in place.
Look, human resources in a given organisation would generally be the one that would take care of this. They would have those processes. They would have things documented, like results of training or participation in particular sessions that might be relating to their development. I know in the organisations that we typically work for, Alison, they require trainers um, to provide documents actually of what they've done in relation to their own development, because what they're trying to do is to create trainers that have current information about their industry. So you and we both need to make sure that we stay current as trainers, and that means we go to information sessions, we're actively subscribed to the latest, magazines, or we're going to what we call professional development sessions where we're learning from other trainers, or we're going into business. If you're training in warehousing and logistics, you might also be working part-time in warehousing logistics to stay fresh and to stay current. So we see a lot of those sort of things in our industry. But typically human resources will be where it's at. If there's any kind of record on these performance appraisals, training that you've done, but generally speaking, those sort of processes regarding how to develop will lie with HR, with human resources. It's a bit of a weird question, guys, but yeah, I'm happy if you refer to human resources for that question. I think you'll have nailed that perfectly.
To be honest, the internet out there has, so much information at our fingertips as well. So if people need to actually, find out how do I improve my customer service or things like that, there's so many tools out there.
Yep. This question sort of saying, hey, look, we know we need to develop staff. Where is it written down? Where would I go in the business if I want to find out about how we go about developing our staff? Is it written down somewhere? And typically internally it'll lie with human resources in that regard. But you're spot on. The information is a pool of the internet is a pool of information out there that'll have some great ideas on staff development, training, professional development, but also latest sessions that anyone can go to increase their knowledge in a given area, industry, or otherwise, improve on a skill, things like that. So I think we've kind of covered it today. We've gone through all of those questions. I think that's it.
Fantastic. I think we've covered, yet again, quite a lot.
Beautiful. Well, thanks for joining me in today's session, Alison. Students, thanks for your attendance as well today. Please stay tuned for the next 2 sessions. We'll actually be taking through the next set, which looks at support the recruitment selection of staff. So we've now taken through all of the learning activities and manage people performance. The next 2 sessions will take you through these 4 learning activities. Alison, I think you'll be joining me on those ones too. So students, will look forward to seeing you in resource support session 3 and 4 for support the recruitment selection of staff, before we take you through the assessments in this, the last subject, leading a performance culture. Thank you, students. Thank you, Alison.
Thanks. Bye, everyone.
Bye, guys.